G'day Doggies fans, all things Bulldogs. It's the NRL Media Watch Ep5, and yet again we're engulfed in continued controversy about our club and the handling of recruits and players and the current sentiment that's come out since we've had a player who has taken a leave of absence due to mental health reasons, which has been widely reported. The player not named, but the player and everyone else knows who it is, and I'm sure the player and his family would know that the vast majority of football fans know that who the player is. So I'm not going to hide behind that. The fact of the matter is that the players are being utilised yet again by the media in order to destabilise Canterbury and an ongoing search for clicks. The best indication Buzz gets of doing a good job for his employer is the amount of clicks and readership data that's produced on the articles that he does. And as they say, what works, you do more of the same. The biggest thing for him is his continued vendetta against Gus Gould. Now, not that Gus minds, and Gus, I'm sure, utilises Buzz as much as Buzz is utilising Gus, no doubt, in order to do their jobs. But one comes across as essentially never commenting on the other, and that's Gus. Gus isn't out there constantly mentioning Buzz Rothfield's name, trying to attack his record or anything like that. It's more of a sense of the opposite, and it makes Buzz Rothfield look very, very shallow and very untrustworthy. We already know that Gus comes out and says what he's got to say to manage business the way that he sees fit, and that draws him a lot of criticism anyway. But in this regard, we have players' mental health at stake, and they are becoming the ones who are being beat up in regards to this situation. Now, I have to discuss the Andrew Davey situation and Jackson Topine and the players mentioned by Buzz Rothfield, but no one should be commenting on Canterbury's handling of mental health issues, but people within the realm of Canterbury itself, because they know. Buzz should be the last person to comment on endangering mental health for the reasons that he is using, especially criticising James Graham for providing criticism on reports that come from Buzz Rothfield regarding Andrew Davey and his time at Belmore. The reason this is important, I pointed out last week that for me the training incident would not be an isolated incident in itself as far as causing a player to need to take absence for mental health reasons. Everyone is different, and I get that. We're talking about that may have been a trigger or a trauma point for the person potentially, where that type of action and the way that they perceived the situation, their feelings on the matter, may have enacted a response which has set him on a downward spiral. That I'm not arguing that point at all, but I am saying that there are definitely would be other circumstances which have put the player into a vulnerable state. People in a situation where you're surrounded by teammates in a gladiatorial sport, where you are fit, where you have put yourself through the ringer, where you believe you would die for your mates, where you've seen failure happen all around you, and where you've seen yourself on the verge and on the cusp of playing and living out your dreams as a consistent first-picked NRL player, suddenly it's far from that. Suddenly, you are now in a situation where you are not only not considered as one of the first pick players, you're further down the list. And when a player like young Jacob Preston comes into the team, which I mentioned last week, it's gonna cause some waves. It just does. When a new guy comes into the office, we've all been there. Now, if you've been the person who's been at a job for a long time, you're doing really well, you consider one of the strong people in the place, and then a new person comes along. Now, a lot of people choose to turn on the management and say the management got it wrong, or they look for what's wrong instead of what's right. A lot of people, they don't like the applauds and accolades going to the new person. And when that new person starts getting picked for the awards and picked for whatever the prize is, and gets all the spotlight, all of a sudden things start to happen. It happens everywhere. I've been the guy who's basically watched someone come in and take their spot. I've been that guy. And as a young guy, I didn't handle it. And I've seen lots of people not handle it. I've seen the natural response be to, look for the flaws and look for the issues rather than looking for what's on how to better yourself and how to work harder to get in front. But the great people who make it in society, you know what they do? And this is what I learned to do. When someone comes in, they're doing great things, you put them more in the spotlight. You highlight more about how well they're doing, and you attach yourself to these people and you learn from them. And you get in there and you want to learn as much as you can from these people. Not just by getting them to tell you, but getting them to show you. And then you go on the journey with them. You know what I mean? And what the people around you, what the management see, and the people who make all the decisions see is someone who's just committed to the team's success and wants to get better, and celebrates other people's successes. That's what works, and that's what works in rugby league. Now, the player Jackson Tupine, I've seen him. He looks to me like he does nothing but celebrate other people's successes, and I have no doubt that that's his intent. And the club's mantra is club, team, then player. Club first. I think I got it in the right order. Might be team, club, then player, but I think it's club, team, player. Now, Buzz Rothfield, when he comes out and says that Canterbury and James Graham aren't helping, and Willie Mason aren't helping with the mental health of these players by talking about it. Well, for a start, when Willie went on his rant, he was ranting specifically about 8 players that were mentioned as saying that the training was too hard and too difficult. That's what he was ranting to, that question and that report, that accusation that had come out as part of a text message, whether it was right or wrong, whether it was bullshit and made up, or whether it was real actually from inside the walls of Canterbury. That's what he was ranting to. He wasn't talking about Jackson Tupine or anyone. Now, in regards to Andrew Davey says that he doesn't understand Ciraldo's style. He had nothing to do about his training being too hard or anything like that. Said didn't really agree with him, yada yada, wasn't working out, he moved on. Has doubts about him as a coach, right? James Graham is responding to that. There's no talk about the mental health of Jackson Tupine in this whatsoever. And the fact that Buzz tries to draw it in as one actual thing is part of the problem. And that's why he is the one who's actually dragging the players' names through the mud. And him personally, how many people has he named and shamed and labelled as part of his quest to raise talking points to bring the public eyes onto stories which promote advertisers of his company? How many? Do I need to go there and go through everything he has said about players, about clubs, about coaches, about administrators? And what is the difference when we're talking about mental health? When he is out there criticising a player, Well, let's say if he is out there criticising a coach or an administrator, let's say Gus Gould, for instance. What is the difference between him providing criticism to Gus Gould and James Graham and Gus Gould's opinions and Gus Gould's actions? How is that different to James Graham commenting on Andrew Davey and what Andrew Davey has said and done? How is it different? Does mental health only apply to the players in the team? Are they the only ones that it applies to? I suppose I could look at it like this. I've had a crack at a few fans. Plenty of fans have had cracks at me. Maybe we should be thinking about each other's mental health a little bit more before we hit each other. Sometimes you don't think of it like that, do you? Where does the responsibility start and where does it stop when it comes to mental health? I agree 100% with James Graham that he wasn't attacking the ability of Andrew Davey. He was simply giving his opinion on what he said and the reasons that he thinks that he left the club. And a lot of players leave for similar reasons without making a song and dance about it. And that is that they're looking for an opportunity. Look at all the players that have come to Canterbury at the moment. They're all looking for an opportunity. And only some of them are able to take it. Now, whether us fans agree that the coach is giving the opportunity to the right players is up to us to debate. But it cannot be said, if you sit there and leave because you don't think you're getting a fair go, well, there might be a club that is a better fit and a better system that works, where you're the type of player that they need. And it doesn't matter if us fans think that you were the type of player we needed at our club at that point. In all respect, Andrew Davey was never considered by the majority of the fan base as a major signing. He was considered as a depth signing and someone that, if he could keep his injuries under control, could contribute to improving our squad as a top 30 player. But we saw him as an edge back rower when we needed middles, and it looked like he was someone who's going to have to help out in the middle. But he is an edge back rower, and James Graham is 100% correct. Jacob Preston went past him. And that's another common denominator, which I said last week. Jackson Topine seeing Jacob Preston come in and push him further down the pecking order. And then Graham making another relevant point in Jayden Okunbor, a winger, also getting picked in the team ahead of all these players, to the detriment of some fans who believe it's a complete wrong move. Doesn't mean they're right though. If Jayden's there putting in the hard work at training and he's putting club team ahead of himself and gets picked as a result, well, who can begrudge him that? When we're talking about the big picture, and talking about a big picture which probably never had Jayden Okunbor in it, it's about the standards that he's adhering to and what he's trying to achieve. And that's the whole point. And we can't sit there and say we know what goes on at training all the time, because we don't. And that could also be bullshit too. But one would like to think, being a coach, and any coaches or people who've done coaching, you always have a spot in your side for the kid that never stops running when they do their laps, whether he comes first or last. The kid who comes first all the time when doing their runs and laps. The kid who sees other kids get punished and runs with them to motivate him. Whether he's the most talented or not, he's the one you pick in your fucking team. And Jayden Okunbor might be that guy. And if that's his standard, and then you're recruiting other players that you know have that standard in them as well, that might be more talented and more suitable for your club moving forward, well, that's who you replace those players with. Who's to say that isn't happening? People watch the game, they look for the Hollywood moments, they don't address the numbers. If a player scores lots of tries, means they're a great player. Not always. It's a team sport. The teams utilise, for the most part, or try to utilise their strengths and try to mitigate their weaknesses. and it's no different to training. And no one is suggesting, that's the whole thing. Jackson Topine, Andrew Davey, they maybe have nothing to do with the players that apparently Cameron Ciraldo was mentioning. But Buzz is dragging them all through the mud now. So any player now, knowing fully well that the entire NRL fraternity, the majority of them who had huge questions about Ciraldo and Gus, are now in support of Ciraldo and Gus. And same with the fan base. Majority of the fan base is united. So thank you, News Corp, for your continued push in this regard. And if the rival ticket is behind what Buzz is feeding as well, they're probably creating a rod for their own back, because at the end of the day, this might linger as a shadow over Canterbury, but I don't believe so. I think it's part of the beginning. I believe it's worked in the exact opposite way to what was intended by the people who leaked it. Unless it was leaked deliberately by the club and Channel 9, knowing of what it would do. Us as a fan base have seen nothing but 30-minute, 20-minute, 50-minute, sometimes 60-minute performances for a very, very long time. Fitness is something we've all criticised in our side as having a lack of. So if we've hired the trainer, the head of high performance, the standards are there, and then it comes out in the media that people are worried about the standards. And then Buzz Rothfield sits there and says there's 8 players, which was in the text, obviously. He names Cameron Ciraldo-Mariner based on the earlier report earlier in the season, so draws a line with that, which may not be the same line, and says he was representing some of the Polynesian guys, and then names 6 players, I think. 2 or 3 of them aren't Polynesian, from what I can tell, as being the 8 players. That's what I mean. He's just got a shit file against Gus Gould and anything that Gus Gould touches or works on. And anyway, and as he's getting put in a corner by James Graham, being torn a new one, he's picking up pebbles and stones and throwing them to distract from what's happening to him, that he's getting taken to task on what he's done. He's the one who has put Andrew Davey into a poor space. And Andrew Davey is the one, if he is allowed, given Gus permission to do this, is the one who's alienated himself amongst the NRL fraternity, if that's the right word. Because there's basically, he is the only player who's coming in support of the journalists at all in regards to questioning Cameron Ciraldo and the Gestapo. There's a few players who can't let it go, their performances on the field, and can't let that go, and have made their mind up regardless, and already hated Phil Gould and whatever else, so we'll never change them. But the majority of fans are now united behind the coach. They want to see better, no doubt, and there will be a time limit on this unification, don't you worry about that. But they're united on that front. More so than ever before. All of the ex-players speaking about the matter are all in defence of Ciraldo, which means if they're in defence of the coach, that means they're in defence of the club and the board, and everyone's safe in that regard. That's the situation right there. That's the situation right there. And Buzz Rothfield, that's his job, to get more clicks, to get more favours, more happiness. That's his job. And the way he does that is by talking about his favourite subject, which is his vendetta against Phil Gould and whatever Phil Gould's involved with. He has done more to cripple players' mental health, if he has been successful. He's done more in that space to be negative on that than any ex-player, than any club has done. Your response to what's happening at your club is your response. It's your feelings. Feelings can be validated by the media. Feelings can be validated by people you speak to, your family, your friends, or other players on the outer, maybe even some who aren't on the outer. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that you are right. It doesn't mean that it's justification for you to attack the club. But it can be justification for you to feel pretty shit about yourself and have some mental health issues. And that, you know, I'm sure when these players have hopes and dreams and they're not achieving them, and other players are going past them, and that's why the Preston thing's a very important discussion in this, and also Ockenbaugh and some other players potentially as well who were getting picked, when fans are probably saying, why are they picking these guys? And some of the players themselves will be starting to think, why are they picking these guys? Maybe there's a correlation there, but we just don't know. But that's going to affect your mental health. It's going to start making you see things differently, and all the, you know, nasty stuff comes out of you. But for some players, it may also see them self-harm, and I don't mean by cutting themselves and stuff like that, by essentially believing the criticism, believing they're not good enough, seeing their dreams and their hopes fade, seeing the confidence in fans and you know, their family eroded. Do you think it would have been, as I said last week, do you think it would have been easy for Torpenay in front of the fans at Belmore to let in 3 tries when one of his heroes in Josh Reynolds has played his last game that day in front of a sold-out Belmore crowd, people he's adored and loved? Do you think that would have been easy for him to handle? It's not an excuse though, but it would not have been easy. Surely that's going to contribute. And then be all the other knockbacks. If he's been late on other occasions, if he's sat there and might have been told he was a real good chance of playing next week and then not played. All these sorts of things. If he's been getting a hard time from the trainer, that could have something to do with it. You just don't know. And it's his right to feel however he feels, but it's not an excuse and doesn't give him excuses. And it doesn't give people an excuse to sit there and say it's all right to be all quiet about one person who's being criticised because it's sensitive, but it's all right for those same people to go and criticise others. They're in the world of criticism. The criticism doesn't go away just because someone doesn't like the criticism. Okay? Now, to me, there's a time and place for it though. So, for example, when there's a death, you hold off on your criticism with the people that might be closely linked or affected by that death. It's not a time to say, I told you so, or to start rubbishing them about other things. You know, the way that they went at South Sydney the week of Kyle's death, Kyle Turner, a few days after, I just felt it was bad timing. It's not to say that life doesn't go on and you're not excused from the criticism. It was never about excusing people from that. It's all about the timing. And they could have waited. But no, the media has to take advantage of all the stories when they see fit. And for example, they hold on. They knew that there was some things happening there and they held on to it and waited. And they deliberately, a couple of weeks earlier, built things up beyond imagine, probably knowing it was going to crumble. Would not surprise me in the slightest. So you've got that as well. But in relation to Phil Rothfield taking the martyr stance and preaching to people that they're harming mental health of players, when the amount of rubbish and dirt that he's thrown at people, players, administrators, coaches, is enough to have, contributed to the poor mental health of numerous people. over numerous amounts of years. He has no right to be sitting there bloody trying to school someone on that very point, especially someone who suffers from it, and he would have known that. Buzz would have known that for sure. It doesn't give you excuses. It may provide you reasons as to why your performance may be lower. It may provide you reasons as to why you're struggling to do things you need to do, but it doesn't give you an excuse. It doesn't make it mean you're void of being told that you haven't performed or you haven't done well enough, that you were late today, even if that's the truth, you know. Doesn't void any of that stuff, right? All these players that Buzz has mentioned are now going to be seen as pariahs. They're going to be seen as vermin themselves, potentially. What clubs are going to want to talk to Ryan Sutton? His missus said something on social media at Canberra, which was widely reported, after the Dogs had already signed him, by the way. And there's reports that he was one of the players with Raymond Faitala-Mariner. He was one of the ones mentioned. And the club's come and said that that was all a storm in a teacup and completely misconstrued. You got Big Ray's wife, apparently, with text messages and stuff, and talking about Ciraldo having favourites. Well, maybe that links. You can draw links there. Doesn't mean it's true. But for Buzz to link all those players he mentioned, and to link Aaron Schopp. Aaron Schopp is on the record of saying that he said he doesn't want to leave Canterbury and he will stay and not leave and all this sort of stuff. And tell the Titans to bugger off if they guarantee him a starting spot on the side. He was on record with that. That links to Andrew Davey and what James Graham said. I can draw a line there because it fits. Just like I can draw the same line to the Jacob Preston mention. A player comes in and puts himself in front of the other players that are there. Other players see the writing on the wall, which is what I talked about last week. Writing's on the wall. Dreams and legacies become vulnerable. We start to look for things to blame. We start to look for a way out. We start to look outward instead of inward, which is the other key here as well. All those players have been surpassed by players that they probably didn't expect, and it hasn't gone down well with them or probably their families or anyone else. So these are all the things that all come into it. Yet Buzz Rothfield, all he's interested in, all he wants to do is utilise these players. Andrew Davey has validated his opinion and what he's trying to do for Buzz Rothfield. So Buzz has sat there and thrown him to the wolves. There's no way he should have mentioned his name. People don't trust Buzz as it is, and he's so desperate to get some trust and some belief in what he said, he's willing to knowingly put a player on the chopping block like that. And it's not just James Graham who said stuff. James was very, very direct and to the point. But there's a whole heap of commentators, including Gordon Tallis and Braith, who were there last night, including, the Greg Alexanders, the Cameron Smiths. Like they all have taken the position of the players. It's united most of Canterbury fans. It's united most people's perception in favour of Ciraldo, except for the diehards who hate Canterbury and hate Gus and whatever. And the journalists, of course, who want to keep this story going. Buzz is contributing more to bad mental health, and for him to sit there and put that on James Graham in Canterbury is an absolute disgrace. He just made himself look more stupid and giving me some stuff to bitch about, which he's very, very good at doing. That's my thoughts on the matter. They've made drawn these long bows between player mental health and situations which aren't related to each other, and they've tried to combine them all into one thing. Remember, James Graham was addressing Andrew Davey and no one else, and Willie Mason was addressing a text message sent about 8 players. Had nothing to do with a player walking away due to mental health issues. Nothing at all. And then they talk about that separately, and they talk about training standards, and they talk about, well, this is what we do, and this is a man's thing, and it all gets melded in eventually. But the actual rants that people are going off about, and saying it's only because Willie and James are linked to our club and work for our club, is completely off the mark. Completely off the mark. Maybe more exaggerating their response because they see firsthand what's going on a lot of the time, or secondhand. But at the same time, they would give those comments, just like Gordon Tallis has, just like most of the NRL media and ex-players have said, and current players as well, mind you, that all this sort of shit is just part of the code that you don't cross. You just don't cross that line when you're a player. You don't do what Andrew Davey did, because you're only isolating and alienating yourself. And I hope his mental health isn't affected because he's been thrown to the wolves by Buzz Rothfield in his endeavours to get some validation, in his endeavour to get some trust. And it hasn't worked. It's backfired. The whole thing's backfiring on the people who have released these leaks to try and destabilise Canterbury, because it's actually it's helped the current board, it's helped the current coach, it's helped the current head of football, and it's going to help the core of players that remain at the club, because they're going to essentially be the ones that have been picked to stay. And all of the other players now that have left or are leaving are going to have this cloud over them that they didn't like the training standards when they were there. And the only one who hasn't is Jake Averillo, obviously, because he's the only one who's probably going to leave and get a massive pay rise. I think Pele would have got a good pay rise going to England, because they were trying to get him for all season, and maybe Ockenball might get something a little bit more, who knows. But that's my thoughts. Half an hour of me talking on this, but it's important we don't allow this to come in, and Rothfield to come in and start saying that the club doesn't know how to handle mental health. I'm not saying that I know if they're doing it good or bad, but I'm pretty sure most organisations that I've experienced in the last 5 to 10 years, that's one of their major focuses. It's how do they balance giving feedback and holding people to expectations without, and managing their mental health when things aren't going well for those people, and knowing the signs and asking questions, and it's a real juggling act, and it'd be hard to be put. And a lot of people are different, so it's not easy. But as James Graham said, doesn't give you excuses, doesn't take away accountability or responsibility. And if you're going to, and for people, and I don't believe the player thinks that either. I really don't. I don't believe that. I think it's just the media. They're trying to make out that Gus and Cam are like Hitler and Frigler, or whoever the other one is. They're trying to run a dictatorship and a psychopathic regime, and everything that's wrong with Canterbury. And I don't believe that to be the case at all. Because if they are, make sure you get rid of Andrew Ryan and Willie and Oga and Zap and all the players that are fucking involved with Canterbury at the moment. All the ex-greats that we loved and got their signatures and still adore and still support as part of being a legacy of this great club. Well, we can fuck all them off too. Mick Potter, get rid of them all. Because it's one in or all in. But all they're interested in is their heroes and villains, and right now the villains are Gus and Cam Ciraldo, and they just want to point the finger at them, and they're not going to stop until they get them. But guess what? If Canterbury turn it around and we start making finals and doing all that, then they will just forget about it until there's another opportunity to land another blow. Anyway, guys, that's my thoughts, my opinion. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. And there'll be a lot more coming up about the new breed of Bulldogs. The ones that are, I expect to see as part of our core for the next, 2 to 3, 4 years. And let's hope that is the case, because they're starting to build a group of players which I believe are much higher quality than what we had 4 or 5 years ago. All right, thank you very much. Take care.